Welcome to today's HealthLine webinar from the American Association of Kidney Patients, titled Increasing Diversity in Clinical Trials, the FIND-CKD Study, an AAKP HealthLine Innovator webinar sponsored by Bayer Pharmaceuticals. My name is Erin Kahle, and I am honored to serve as AAKP's Deputy Director. AAKP's HealthLine webinars fall under our Center for Patient Research and Education. We believe patient and caregiver education is an integral part of treatment and protection of patient lives. We work to ensure that the patient has a central role in research and guidance that are designed to determine optimal approaches and strategies for providing healthcare services, assistance programs, and access to new products and services. We built this center with the latest polling and engagement technologies to ensure that kidney patients take a central role in informing the federal, academic, and private sector research, shaping the next generation of healthcare services, assistance programs, and innovative new treatments. And we encourage you to respond to our flash surveys and other engagement opportunities that you receive via email. AAKP is pleased to launch our Innovator webinar series, an extension of our normal HealthLine webinar programming. The content of this program as presented and financial support of this webinar was provided by Bayer Pharmaceuticals. As the oldest and largest patient-led kidney patient organization in the U.S., AAKP is proud to host this Innovator webinar as a service to the expanding national and global communities of patient consumers and their families, medical practitioners, researchers, and policymakers following innovation and advancements in kidney care and treatment. AAKP is an aggressive supporter of innovation to change status quo care. While this activity is an approved educational webinar, AAKP does not endorse this webinar nor endorse or promote any specific commercial entities or products. Thank you again to Bayer Pharmaceuticals for sponsoring this webinar. I'd like to introduce Paul Conway, AAKP's Chair of Policy and Global Affairs. Paul serves as a team member for the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, a public-private partnership co-founded by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and Duke University to improve efficiency and quality in clinical trials. Paul has been involved with their remote clinical trial policy development project for the past 3 years. Paul is joining us today to share some patient insights on participating in clinical trials from a flash survey we disseminated, helping to lay the groundwork for today's webinar. Paul, I turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Erin. This is a very important issue for kidney patients and for the future of medical innovation, especially in the biologic space. As kidney patients for decades, it's fair to say that we have not been included in clinical trials. And the good news is the terrain is changing, but it's important to understand that for several decades, patients simply have not been brought to the table if they have kidney disease. And for AAKP, this is a major policy priority. We believe that the development of new medicines and new devices for patients should reflect the patient populations that they're directly intended for and those patient populations that are having the most impact of disease. In the survey questions that we asked, we wanted to get a better understanding from patients because so much has been done at the national level, at the federal level. The FDA has issued many different guideline recommendations and memorandums encouraging industry to do more to involve kidney patients in clinical trials. And you have other entities that have been out there encouraging kidney patients to be more involved. The Kidney Health Initiative, AAKP, ASN, the American Society of Nephrology, all have been trying to get more patients involved and to get industry to invite patients to become more involved in innovation through clinical trials. So we went out to our patient database and asked a series of questions to give some insights and context for today's discussion. So we asked the simple question of how many of you have been asked to participate in a clinical trial? And as you might surmise, it's not many. 21% indicated they had been asked, 79%, nearly 80% of kidney patients indicated they had never been asked to participate in a clinical research trial. And then when we asked of those who had participated, would you participate again? 93% said yes, which is a stunning number. That's an indication of satisfaction with the trial they participated in and how they were treated as individuals and as patients. We asked this question. Of those who had said no, they had never been asked, we asked to try to drill down a little bit more how many would be interested. 23% said yes, and although 9% said no, clearly the majority wanted to know more information, 68%. They wanted to be asked, number one, and number two, they wanted to get the details of what that trial would involve. So regardless of whether folks had been asked to participate or not, we then asked what was the most important thing or concern that they had in terms of a risk. And what's understandable is that patients said that the risk to their overall health was of a concern and the possibility of side effects. So about 72, almost 73 quarters of the folks that were asked had these types of concerns about health and side effects. You can see some of the other issues there that were identified as well. In the next slide, we asked what folks thought would be the greatest benefit. And I think this is very important as patients are being recruited for and as we encourage patients to participate. AAKP always speaks to the high idealism that patients have. And clinical trials is one of those issues that brings forward the idealism of a patient. Because you can see here in this first number, 41% believe that participating in clinical trials would advance science. That's very important. Science and treatment. Patients clearly understand what their impact can be. And in the second most important rating here, they thought it would help the lives of others. And so this idea of advancing science and improving the lives of others is critical. And down in the lower tier is a direct feeling that people would feel they derive from a clinical trial, which that it would help improve their disease or condition. This is very important when we try to recruit patients to participate in clinical trials, that we appeal to the idealism to make an impact in the lives of others and to advance science, especially if you're a kidney patient. And then in this slide, it kind of gives you an array of the top 5 questions that patients had. And what I would call on this slide is it's pretty obvious. It breaks down into 4 different buckets. It's what's the purpose of the clinical trial, what's the scope, what's the risk to the individual, and somewhat surprising, I think, to some of the medical practitioners and some of the researchers that AAKP works with, 36% of the patients wanted to know what exactly are the qualifications of those who are conducting the study. And I will tell you, these are the types of questions that AAKP asks of industry or of government when they come to AAKP seeking recruitment of patients. And so what you'll hear today is a great lineup of speakers talking about the importance of clinical trials and especially increasing the diversity in clinical trials. Because given kidney disease and its disparate impacts on different populations across the United States, in the African American community, the Hispanic community, and increasingly at a younger age, it's very important that when different drugs and devices are coming together, that those drugs and devices actually reflect the populations that are most impacted. It's common sense. But in the kidney community, we have decades that have elapsed with not much inclusion. And we think it's time for a change. And the greatest driver of that change is patients working with other patients and with researchers. Government can play its role, industry can play its role. But when industry comes to a patient organization like AAKP and says, we need help, as patients, we need to be able to stand up and say, we're interested, tell us more. How does this impact our safety? What can we do to improve the lives of others? And what are the details that we need to know? Respect us, show us the dignity, and you'll probably get us to be involved. But the onus is on folks to explain it to us what the benefit is. And then very clearly, you'll see that patients are willing to stand up and help be part of the solution for the future. Thank you very much. Erin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm so excited about today's webinar and today's speakers. So I'd like to get us started and introduce our first guest speaker today, Christine Hernandez. Christine has dedicated her life to helping others. She has been a registered nurse for over 9 years. In 2016, she found out she had kidney disease that was incurable and, along with her siblings and other family members, discovered they have a genetic condition that attacks different people at different stages of life, with everyone in the family having a 50-50 chance of getting this disease. Christine believes more funding needs to be acquired for kidney disease research and treatments. Her purpose as an AAKP ambassador is to make sure that kidney warriors have rights and that legislation to help them live better lives and not worry about things that are irrelevant. Christine also wants to help make a difference by using her experience as a nurse and as a warrior. Christine, thank you for joining us today. I turn things over to you to share with us about you and your family's experience.
I'm going to talk a little bit today about my experience in research and how I got into research for my specific disease, which is MUC1 kidney disease. First and foremost, I became an AAKP ambassador because I believe that being involved and being a part of something so important could impact many lives and change and or save people from even getting to the stages of kidney disease that I am with research, medications, and possible future cures, right? Um, so I basically in 2016 I started looking at a trend in my family and seeing that there was a lot of my brothers both had kidney failure. I didn't have anything at that point. Aunts and uncles had kidney failure, and going down the family lines maternally. So I asked my doctor to give me an evaluation or send me for referral for nephrology. I did that. I got a full nephrology checkup and ended up getting a kidney biopsy, which showed that I had lost already 60% of my kidney function, and I had no idea. So I asked what were the two treatments, like what could we do to save my kidneys? He said there was nothing that could be done, and that the only two treatments were dialysis and or transplant. So that's what I had to look forward to. So and he told me that there was a research study going on in North Carolina at a hospital, and he thought that my condition and the pictures that he got in the samples of my kidneys were of this disease called medullary cystic, or now it's called MUC1 kidney disease. But I had to be diagnosed, and the only way to get diagnosed was as being part of this research program. So I got contacted by the research doctor at the hospital. He called me. I'm going to keep them unnamed right now. Um, and we went through process. There's a process. I had to get educated on the research that they were doing, the purpose for the research, and the outcomes that they wanted, which was initially to have some kind of therapy that could stop the gene from multiplying and allowing a person to live a normal life even if they had the gene. So I got tested and found out I did have it. It's a really rare disease. Like I said, it's called MUC1, and only I think 200 families in the world have it. So my family happens to be one that has it. And it's an autosomal dominant gene. So I have it, and my children have a 50-50 chance of getting it. And already one of my sons has been diagnosed with it. What I've done to participate and put my contribute to the research is I had my kidney removed, and I had to have surgery. So I donated my kidney to the program so that way they could take samples of my kidneys and put them together with different kind of therapies to see what therapies or what is going to work for the disease. And I feel like it's so important for not only myself, but other people that have kidney disease and even other diseases, especially minorities, get involved, because you want a medication or treatment that's going to be tailored to be able to work for you, not take a one-size-fits-all medication that might not work for you because you have a different DNA makeup. And I would participate in any research that I feel like would benefit future diseases for either Hispanics, people in my family, or even find cures for different diseases. Inadequate representation, there are disparities in clinical trials right now. We aren't all being represented because not everybody is participating in clinical trials, or they don't know about clinical trials. So the goal is to try to get people to be a part and participate in clinical trials, and how we're going to get there, right? Historically, there have been a lack of participation amongst minority groups in clinical trials. Systematically, minorities have been left out of clinical trials. The lack of diversity and inclusion can be both harmful and detrimental to our population, right? According to Cornelli et al., new medical products may not be beneficial to all people, so it's not like one perfect circle who need them. And existing inequities in health outcomes amongst various population groups may remain unchanged and or worsen, or new disparities may arise. In collaboration with Duke University, the Food and Drug Administration developed the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative to break barriers and create teams of people to work together and bring forth diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. I think the CTTI is a good tool to have, and I'm going to be looking and reading and researching to see the future of this, because the goal is to evaluate the outcomes of CTTI, right, is yet to be determined. However, working together to bridge gaps can only improve healthcare for the underrepresented. And that's where we all could play a part in, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you for being a proactive kidney warrior and seeking out information about your family history of kidney disease. And it's an amazing step, donating your kidney to research to learn more about MUC1 and how potential therapies may be able to help. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. Susanne B. Nicholas. Dr. Nicholas is a tenured professor of medicine and clinical hypertension specialist in the Division of Nephrology. She chairs the Nephrology Racial and Health Equity Committee at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. She has joint appointments in the Division of Endocrinology, Diabetes and Metabolism, and the Division of General Internal Medicine and Health Policy. Dr. Nicholas's translational research aims to understand and identify key factors that promote diabetic kidney disease pathogenesis, validate novel therapeutic targets and predictive biomarkers of DKD, and perform population studies in chronic kidney disease health disparities using a large CKD registry. Her research over the past 20 plus years has led to the identification of a novel biomarker of DKD. She is NIH funded, has over 120 publications, and over 140 scientific abstracts. She was a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow and received the Minority Access Incorporated National Role Model Faculty Researcher Award, the National Kidney Foundation's Medical Advisory Board Distinguished Service Award for 15 plus years of dedicated volunteer service, and she is the elected president of Women in Nephrology. Dr. Nicholas, I'd like to now turn everything over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that very kind introduction. I have to say that I'm so pleased to be part of this webinar that's talking about increasing participation in clinical trials. So with that, I want to say hello to everyone, and let's get started with the first slide. So we are going to talk about increasing diversity in clinical trials, and then we'll have a discussion on the FIND-CKD study. So here are a list of the things that we'll cover in this presentation. We'll start with a discussion of some important facts about chronic kidney disease, or CKD, talk about some disparities in CKD and clinical trials. We'll discuss some barriers to recruitment and retention in clinical trials, and describe some ways to reduce disparities in clinical trials. And we'll end with a discussion of the FIND-CKD study. So we're talking about chronic kidney disease. And so you may ask the question, what tests can tell me how well my kidneys are working? Well, there are two tests that can tell you how well your kidneys are working. The first test is an estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR. It's a blood test that tells you how well your kidneys are filtering waste out of your blood. And it's based on the level of creatinine in your blood, which is a waste product of muscle that is filtered by the kidneys and excreted into the urine. And so a high blood creatinine may be a sign that your kidneys may not be working well. The other test is a urine albumin to creatinine ratio, or UACR. This is a urine test that measures a protein called albumin that may be leaking into your urine. And so high levels of albumin in your urine is a sign that your kidneys may not be working well. And how would you interpret your results? For example, how would you interpret your eGFR test results? On this slide, you can see that we've got the different stages of chronic kidney disease defined by stages 1 through 5, and the eGFR measurement that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, as well as a pictorial imaging of what that level of kidney function may be, and a lay description of the general level of function of the kidneys. So let's look at a couple of these. For stage 1, this describes a stage where both the protein and your level of kidney function, or your eGFR, may actually be in the normal range, where your eGFR may be 90 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meters squared or higher. And as you can see in that little diagram of the kidney, let's say you have pretty much a full tank. And at that point, you've got at least 90% of your kidney function. For an individual who may have stage 2 chronic kidney disease, they may have some protein in the urine with only mild loss of their kidney function, such that their eGFR may be in the range of 89 to 60 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meters squared. And so on for stage 3A, where there's mild to moderate loss of kidney function, stage 3B, where there's moderate to severe loss of kidney function, stage 4, where there is severe loss of kidney function, and then for stage 5, where the individual may actually have kidney failure and their eGFR is less than 15. And so how would you interpret your UACR test results? Well, a normal UACR is a value that is under 30 milligrams per gram, and that's 30 milligrams of albumin per gram of creatinine. And so UACR that's higher than 30 milligrams per gram may be a sign of early kidney damage. If you're getting your test, you come to your doctor, you may want to know how often your doctor may test you for CKD. Well, there are a number of recommendations. And for example, when you come to clinic, at every clinic visit, you may be tested with your blood pressure measurement and may be assessed for any evidence that you may be retaining excess fluid, particularly in patients with advanced stages of chronic kidney disease where the kidneys aren't able to retain or reabsorb the fluid. You may have signs of excess fluid, such as edema in the legs, for example. When it comes to laboratory evaluations, for an individual with CKD stage 3, they may have their labs performed every 6 to 12 months. For an individual with CKD stage 4, these laboratory evaluations may be done every 3 to 5 months. And for CKD stage 5, they may be done even more frequently, every 1 to 2 months. In addition, evaluations may be performed as needed if there are symptoms and signs of advanced kidney disease, or if there are changes in therapy. This slide shows you a grid that may provide some information on your risk of worsening CKD. So it gives you information about your prognosis, and it's color coded based on the GFR that you can see on the table on the left-hand side, and the urine albumin or albuminuria categories on the upper part of the grid. And what you see here is that for someone whose eGFR and albuminuria levels place them in the upper left-hand corner of the grid, let's say in the green sections, they may have either normal kidney function or just mildly reduced kidney function. On the other hand, an individual who may be progressing in their kidney disease along this path towards the lower right-hand corner in the red sections, for example, someone who has kidney failure where their eGFR is less than 15 and they've got severely increased albuminuria levels, they are definitely already at significantly high risk of progression and may have attained the level of kidney failure. So you may go from having no or very low risk in the upper left-hand corner to having very high risk and even developing kidney failure in the lower right-hand corner of the grid. Very important grid. I actually really like this grid because I think it can be very informative for both the patient to see where they are and what things that they can do to help decrease the progression of their disease, as well as the provider to provide information to the patient on their level of kidney disease, but also their risk of progression. So with that background on chronic kidney disease, did you know that CKD affects millions of people worldwide? In fact, in the general population, data that was obtained in 2017 indicated that globally, 9.1% or almost 700 million individuals had CKD. And in the United States, in more recent data, 2019, about 15% of US adults, or 37 million individuals, were affected by chronic kidney disease. Unfortunately, most people do not know that they have CKD. Within the general population, 9 in 10 adults, 90%, with CKD do not know they have CKD. And 1 in 2 individuals with very low kidney function who are not yet receiving dialysis therapy also do not know that they have chronic kidney disease. Well, it turns out, there are a number of risks for CKD, some of which we can't do anything about, and some of which we can change. Here you have a list of some risk factors that we really can't do anything about. Advancing age, we'd certainly like to stop the clock, but we can't. Genetic factors, having a family history of type 2 diabetes. And I bring this up here because type 2 diabetes is really the most common cause of chronic kidney disease, as well as the most common cause of kidney failure. So having a family history of type 2 diabetes puts you at risk for developing chronic kidney disease. Also, having a family history of chronic kidney disease puts you at risk for having chronic kidney disease, as well as sex. It turns out that more women have chronic kidney disease while more men have kidney failure. And then there are several risk factors for chronic kidney disease that we can change, such as metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome really describes a cluster of conditions that may increase your risk for heart disease, stroke, or even type 2 diabetes, and may include high blood pressure, high blood sugar, obesity or obesity around the waist specifically, and an abnormal cholesterol level or an elevated triglyceride level. Other factors include obesity, insulin resistance, where you develop resistance to the insulin hormone so that your blood sugar increases, as well as smoking, high blood pressure, and the use of agents or medications that may be toxic to the kidneys, what we call nephrotoxic agents. Well, there are also several complications that one may experience from having chronic kidney disease, and these usually occur when your eGFR is less than 60 in the more advanced stages of chronic kidney disease and may include high blood pressure, where your blood pressure is greater than 140 over 90 millimeters of mercury, electrolyte abnormalities, such as an elevated potassium, where your kidneys are at such an advanced stage that they can't really maintain potassium homeostasis within your blood, and so the blood levels increase, or metabolic acidosis, where your blood bicarbonate levels are persistently lower than normal because the kidneys aren't really able to compensate, or anemia or fluid retention. We talked a little bit about that earlier, as well as bone disease. It turns out that the kidneys play a very important role in producing hormones that are involved in bone metabolism. And so when your kidney function declines, you're unable to maintain that homeostasis around bone metabolism. And this may affect not only the bone, but also your heart, as well as blood vessels in an individual with advanced chronic kidney disease. Some severe complications from having type 2 diabetes, as I mentioned, this is the most common cause of chronic kidney disease, as well as kidney failure, are that about 10% of individuals with type 2 diabetes and chronic kidney disease may progress to kidney failure, requiring some form of replacement therapy, such as dialysis or kidney transplantation. And 90% of individuals may also die of other causes, even without reaching kidney failure. In fact, 50% of individuals may die from cardiovascular disease. And for those who actually reach kidney failure, 58% may die from cardiovascular disease and 13% may die from infections. And so, with that information, and you've already heard the term health disparities mentioned earlier, so let's talk a little bit about health disparities and what it actually means. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, health disparities has been defined as preventable differences in the burden of disease, injury, violence, or opportunities to achieve optimal health that are experienced by socially disadvantaged populations. And so health disparities can lead to health inequity. And you heard some of this mentioned earlier. When we look at disparities in the United States, there are a number of racial and ethnic groups that suffer more from chronic kidney disease than others. For example, African Americans make up about 13.6%, and Hispanics make up about 18.5% of the US population. But both African Americans and Hispanics have the highest prevalence of chronic kidney disease, as is shown here in the figure below. As you can see, non-Hispanic Blacks, just circled with a dashed line, have 16% of CKD in US adults aged 18 years and older, whereas Hispanics have a percentage of 14%. Compare that to non-Hispanic whites, who have a percentage of CKD of 13%. And in fact, African Americans also have higher prevalence of kidney failure compared to white Americans. African Americans have approximately threefold higher risk of developing kidney failure at a younger age. And they also represent 35% of individuals with kidney failure. Also, African Americans have a 2 to 4-fold greater incidence of kidney failure when compared to white individuals. And this slide shows you some of the data around African Americans having higher rates of risk factors such as high blood pressure compared to whites. In fact, as you've seen in this graph, older African Americans in the age group of 35 to 64 years are 50% more likely to have high blood pressure than white individuals, with African Americans represented in the dark red bars and white Americans represented in the bluish green bars. Black and African Americans also suffer more from signs of early diabetes called metabolic syndrome, and we described this earlier. So metabolic syndrome is seen in 50 million American adults, But 64.8% of African Americans with diabetes have metabolic syndrome. And this is especially observed in African American women, and it's usually to more due to more cases of obesity and diabetes. Here we look at some other risk factors and the data on these regarding higher rates of smoking, as you can see in the far left graph, higher rates of being very sedentary in the middle graph, where across the board in terms of age groups, African Americans have higher rates of being sedentary compared to whites, and also higher rates of obesity, again, across the board at all different age groups. So knowing these risk factors, knowing the data on these risk factors, knowing how you can measure and monitor your kidney disease and your risk for progression, and the fact that there are studies that may be focused on either reducing the risk or uncovering therapies to improve chronic kidney disease, what should you know about clinical trials? Well, a clinical trial is defined as a research study with one or more human subjects assigned to receive a treatment such as placebo, like a sugar pill, or a control to evaluate the effects of treatment on specific clinical outcomes such as blood pressure. And the goal of clinical trials really is to determine if an investigational test or treatment works and if it is safe. Clinical trials can also look at other aspects of care, such as improving the quality of life for individuals with chronic illnesses. This is a very interesting study, and it actually demonstrates that very few racial and ethnic minority groups are enrolled in clinical trials. And the data are obtained from FDA approval studies, specifically for cancer. And what you see here is that for the total enrollment of over 70,000 individuals who reported their race, only 2.2% of the total enrolled were self identified Black. And as you can see, there are similarly lower recruitment rates or enrollment rates for Native Americans, Hispanic, as well as Asians. In this study, they went on to demonstrate that there were significant disparities, not only in the incidence and the mortality due to these cancers compared to the number of individuals enrolled in the study for Black individuals, as well as Native Americans and other racial, Hispanic, and ethnic minority groups. But this was very different for the numbers that they observed in terms of incidence and mortality, as well as enrollment numbers that were on par for white individuals. And so overall, the study demonstrates that there's significant underrepresentation of racial and ethnic minorities in a number of clinical trials. So with that, you may ask, or want to know, why are clinical trials important? Why should I be interested? Well, clinical trials are really at the heart of all medical advances. They look at investigational ways to prevent, detect, or treat disease such as CKD. They look at investigational treatments such as investigational drugs or investigational combinations of drugs, investigational surgical procedures or devices, or investigational ways to use existing treatments. And so clinical trials really offer hope for future treatments and an opportunity to help researchers find treatments for others in the future. And you observed some of the results from the survey that Paul Conway mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, very much reflective of this. So what are some reasons why you may want to participate in a clinical trial? Well, there are many, but I'll just describe a few here. Healthy volunteers may participate in studies to help others and to contribute to moving science forward. Participants with an illness or disease may also want to help others and Also, you may participate to have the additional care and attention from the clinical trial staff. Last year, my colleagues and I, who were members of the American Society of Nephrology Healthcare Justice Committee, were acutely aware of the need to increase diversity in recruitment and retention to clinical trials. And so we got together and assessed and published on some activities to engage patients and stakeholders. And I'll just go through one of these, the first row of these, and I encourage you to get a copy of the paper and take a look at some of the other suggestions that we provided here. And if we have time at the end, we can come back and discuss it. But some activities regarding increasing diversity in kidney disease clinical trials, specific targets may include pre-market reporting of diversity action plans and having a very explicit diversity plan so that the actual recruitment and retention of diverse participants does not come across as an afterthought. Also, we can target enrollment specifically in safety net clinics, hospitals, urban neighborhoods, and to be certain that we include considerations for reimbursement to participants for their travel, lost wages, and childcare. So discussion on clinical trials would be remiss if we did not also describe the different phases of a clinical trial. Phase 1 clinical trials are trials where the researchers test a drug or treatment in a small group of people, usually about 20 to 80 individuals for the first time, to study the investigational drug or treatment to learn about safety and to identify side effects. Phase 2 clinical trials are those where the investigational drug or treatment is given to a larger group of individuals, maybe 100 to 300, to determine its effectiveness and to further study its safety. Phase 3 clinical trials are those where the investigational drug or treatment is given to an even larger group of individuals, anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 individuals, to confirm its effectiveness, to monitor side effects, and to compare the drug with standard of care or similar treatments, and also to collect safety information. And phase 4 clinical trials are those where, after the drug has been approved by the FDA and has been made available to the public, researchers track its safety in the general public, seeking more information about a drug or treatment's benefits. So with that information about chronic kidney disease, about health disparities and disparities in CKD, let's now talk about the FIND-CKD study, which is a phase 3 study of finerenone that is sponsored by Bayer. So this slide shows the actual study design that will include non-diabetic CKD patients or patients with CKD not due to diabetes. This study is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, parallel group, multi-center phase 3 study that will investigate the efficacy and safety of finerenone and standard of care on the progression of kidney disease in patients with non-diabetic chronic kidney disease. Participants will be given finerenone either 10 or 20 milligrams once daily or a placebo. The study intervention period will consist of a minimum of 32 months and a maximum of approximately 50 months for each participant. And all participants, by the end of the study, when the last randomized participant has reached 32 months of treatment, will end their study. The study population will include male or females who are 18 years or older, and patients with non-diabetic chronic kidney disease of different disease etiologies and who are at risk of progressive renal function decline. The goals of the study are to study and assess the following in patients with non-diabetic CKD. In particular, the study would look at finerenone's efficacy, specifically looking at effects of kidney function, the eGFR slope or the decline or change in the slope of eGFR, the UACR measurements, as well as the development of kidney failure. We'll also look at effects on heart disease, including hospitalization for heart failure or cardiovascular, stroke, heart disease, or death, and time to first cardiovascular event. This study will also look at safety and tolerability, specifically looking at serious adverse events and adverse events leading to discontinuation or adverse events of special interest, such as hyperkalemia or elevated potassium levels in the blood. So, who may be eligible for this study? This slide has a list of the key inclusion criteria. So, it'll include individuals with chronic kidney disease where their UACR is at least 200 but lower than 500 milligrams per gram, and their eGFR is at least 25 but lower than 60 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meters squared, or their UACR is between 500 and 3,500 milligrams per gram, and the eGFR is at least 25 but lower than 90 milliliters per minute, 1.73 meters squared, and documented albuminuria or proteinuria occurring at least 3 months prior to screening or in the pre-screening period at least 3 months prior to the actual screening. Another inclusion criteria includes individuals who have been on stable treatment at the maximally tolerated doses of angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors or ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers or ARBs for at least 4 weeks prior to screening, as well as potassium levels lower than 4.8 millimoles per liter or 4.8 millimoles per liter, and of course ages that are 18 years and older. But who is not eligible for the study? Some of the main exclusion criteria include individuals with type 2 and type 1 diabetes mellitus and a hemoglobin A1C that's greater than 6.5%, individuals who may have autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease, and who are within the last 6 months have any other primary or secondary kidney disease requiring immunosuppressive therapy, lupus nephritis, or ANCA-associated vasculitis, a type of autoimmune kidney disease that affects the kidney, or have a history of organ transplantation, or within the previous 6 months may have experienced an acute kidney injury requiring dialysis, or who may have uncontrolled high blood pressure where the seated systolic blood pressure is 160 or greater millimeters of mercury, or the diastolic blood pressure is 100 millimeters of mercury or greater, or individuals who have symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction requiring the use of MRAs or mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, or individuals who have very high UACRs where their measurements are greater than 3,500 milligrams per gram, or if within the last 3 months they have experienced a cardiovascular event, or may have Addison's disease or hepatic insufficiency at the very severe stage of their disease. Individuals who may not be eligible for the study also include those who are on concomitant therapy, which cannot be discontinued. And there's a list here, which I'm not going to go through, but some of the drugs include eplerenone or spironolactone, or therapies with an ACE inhibitor or an angiotensin receptor blocker that cannot be discontinued, or a potent CYP3A4 inhibitor or induces and or moderate CYP3A4 inducers. And don't worry too much about that. It just really refers to medications or drugs that may block metabolism of medications within the body. And also individuals who are on high dose steroids. And this slide shows you the actual study design. So I'm going to go through this with you. So we can start at the far left, where it's expected that the study will have about 3,100 individuals, 3,200 individuals in the screening phase that will last anywhere between 3 to 14 days. And there may be a pre-screening that may last up to 30 days prior to the actual screening. And the intervention part of the study, where it's expected to include about 1,500 to 1,600 individuals who will receive finerenone at 10 or 20 milligrams or placebo and will be followed from 13 weeks to approximately 2 months, then followed to approximately 50 months. And the total study period would last about 3 to 4 years, and individuals will have up to 19 study visits. Importantly, all participants will stay on the study until the last randomized participant, the 32 months of treatment. And at this point, all participants will move to the follow-up phase. And the follow-up phase will consist of 1 month of follow-up. And again, as I mentioned, patients will have a number of study visits. So what are some of the examinations that will be performed? Here we see that some of the key examinations include a urine test for albuminuria and proteinuria, which we talked about earlier, blood tests for EGFR and potassium, as well as looking at safety and some pharmacokinetic values, or an ECG, electrocardiogram, as well as some vital signs such as your blood pressure. And what are some of the main expected side effects? And this was one of the questions on the survey. Well, for this study, a very common side effect is hyperkalemia that may occur in 10 in 100 individuals. There are other common side effects that may occur in 1 to 10 in 100 individuals that will include low blood sodium or decreased glomerular filtration rate, or low blood pressure. However, that there are measures to help ensure safety of the study that will include temporarily stopping the study, such as for safety reasons, for example, intolerability, or if the potassium level is elevated greater than 5.5 millimoles per liter. There will be maybe some safety visits that will take place 4 weeks after each up titration of the drug, or where there's a restart of study intervention following treatment interruption that lasts more than 7 days. So with that, I want to provide a summary of our discussion and a conclusion that CKD is a serious public health issue. Racial and ethnic minority groups suffer more than white individuals. Black and African Americans have higher risk factors for chronic kidney disease and tend to advance to kidney failure faster than white individuals. And only few racial and ethnic minority individuals participate in clinical trials. There are indeed several ways to increase recruitment and retention of racial and ethnic minority groups in clinical trials, and we talked about just a few of those. And finally, the FIND-CKD study aims to increase participation of Black and African American participants with chronic kidney disease. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And I would pass it back to Erin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholas, for speaking with us today about what a clinical trial is and for sharing information about the FIND-CKD trial for individuals with non-diabetic chronic kidney disease. That was a great presentation. Thank you. I'd like to bring Christine back to share some parting words with us before we get to some of our audience questions. Christine?
Thank you, Erin. Now that you learned about this clinical trials and clinical trials in general, you may wonder what your next step is. Ask your healthcare provider about clinical trials that you might be eligible to participate in, or you could also visit the AAKP website at they have a list of clinical trials that you might be interested in, as well as getting emailed updates of clinical trials that might become eligible or available for you at research at aakp.org. That's research at aakp.org. You'll be notified via email about clinical trials that will be available. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you both, Dr. Nicholas and Christine, for great presentations. We have a few questions from audience members that I'd like to pose. Our first question I have is for Dr. Nicholas. What have been some of the challenges when recruiting minority participants for the FIND-CKD trial?
Well, thanks for that question. So there were a number of challenges that were experienced when it came to recruitment for the FIND-CKD study. And we actually were able to identify some of the challenges by providing a survey to identify some of the issues that could potentially be overcome. So, for example, one of the things that we talked about, and we made a very clear decision when the recruitment for minorities within the study, when the committee was organized, was to make sure that patients were provided with some level of education around chronic kidney disease, such as what I did earlier today, to make sure that participants, I should say, are aware that the clinical staff really is very interested in their overall welfare. Some of the investigators that were involved in the study did a number of things, such as, making sure that they provided thank you notes to the participants. They sent out birthday cards, etc., just to let them know that it's not just about getting them into the study and signing on the consent form, but letting them understand that the clinical staff really cares about them. A number of things that we have discussed as a result of the survey that may be implemented in future studies include providing reimbursement to participants for travel, providing childcare, or expanding office hours so that individuals who work during the day and may have time after hours may have access to participating in the studies or even on weekends. So those were some of the challenges that we faced and some of the challenges that we identified as a result of surveying the clinical trial sites that hopefully will be able to contribute to future studies around chronic kidney disease.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. And I think you touched on my next question here. Usually large cities are selected for as trial sites. So if somebody doesn't live near a large hospital, or if they are not in the city where the site location is, how can somebody get involved in the trial?
It touches on the topic of healthcare deserts. Most studies, as we are all aware, involve recruiting patients that live within large urban areas that are close to very large hospitals. On the other hand, individuals who live in rural areas maybe aren't as aware that there are clinical trials and may not have access. So there there are a number of strategies now that are being entertained and performed to enlarge that area of research and reaching out to individuals. Understanding some of the barriers. So, for example, it's not just about the distance, but the fact is maybe in some rural areas, the participants or potential participants may not have access to the internet. They may not have access to some of the technology that may be needed to be used in some of these clinical trials. And so taking that into consideration, there's now a huge push to make sure that individuals can participate in clinical trials, such as using their personal cell phones, where they can enter information into their cell phones, or they can participate remotely so that there are fewer in-person visits where they have to travel far distances. And so just by understanding some of the issues around the fact that there are healthcare deserts, and knowing what strategies can be utilized, the hope is that for future there'll be many more individuals in rural areas participating in these clinical trials. I would also like to suggest and would add to what Christine mentioned that you can go to various sites to get information about existing clinical trials. So she mentioned the AAKP website, but also you can go to clinicaltrials.gov where they have a long list of clinical trials that are ongoing or trials that may have been completed of trials that really haven't begun to recruit patients as yet. And you can search for specific trials that you might be interested in. You can also go to FDA.gov and get more information about disparities in clinical trials, get information about how you can participate in clinical trials, and also go to the Human Health and Services or HHS.gov to get more information about clinical trials. So there's information out there, and I guess on both ends, participants can engage in strategies to get more information about clinical trials, but also on the provider end, researchers and companies are really spending more effort and time to target some of the urban areas and these healthcare deserts to include or increase diversity in clinical trials.
Thank you. It's really encouraging to hear that strategies are being developed to increase access to and participation in clinical trials. I know many trials do, depending on the site, they do offer some transportation stipends and, help or maybe some telehealth check-ins rather than going to the site. So I know that can be really beneficial for those who don't live in the immediate area. So Dr. Nicholas, you touched a little bit on some of the resources that are available for individuals looking for more information on clinical trials. I'd like to ask Christine that same question. Where would you go to learn more about clinical trials? And how would you start that conversation with your healthcare team?
Thank you for that question. I would talk to my doctor and ask her or him if there are any clinical trials available that I might be eligible for, and or what I've done for my patients in the past is when they're interested in clinical trials and they ask me, I do research with them, or I send them to the National Institute of Health. They have clinical trials, and what the doctor touched on, clinicaltrials.gov. That's another good website to look at. AAKP website, and also the FDA website. There's so many clinical trials out there that you could get involved in and do your part in helping yourself, your family members, and your community is so important. And there's so many resources out there for us to find clinical trials. All you have to do is look, and it's pretty simple.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you again so much to Dr. Nicholas, to you, Christine, for this wonderful webinar on such a very important topic. Thank you for your time today. And I would like to close with just a few resources that may be of interest to you from AAKP. If you are not already a member of AAKP, we encourage you to join. We offer free membership to patients and family members, as well as living kidney donors. You can become a free member online at aakp.org or by phone at 1-800-749-2257. And to receive all of the benefits of membership, please be sure to include your email address when signing up. As an AAKP member, you will be notified by email when opportunities arise where your opinions and experiences are needed to help inform innovation, advance care, and make a meaningful impact to improve lives. We also encourage you to respond to our flash surveys and other engagement opportunities to help us elevate the patient voice and change the status quo for kidney disease care. You can also select to receive any of our 5 different electronic newsletters and subscribe to our print magazine, AAKP Renal Life. We also invite you to follow us on our blog and social media for all the latest news and announcements. AAKP is dedicated to helping kidney patients across the disease spectrum understand their condition and take control of their healthcare. We are proud to offer a variety of resources for both patients and caregivers. You can visit our website at aakp.org and click on the Store button at the top of the homepage. And there you can find a variety of educational brochures and online tools to order or download, including our Coping, Living, and Thriving with Kidney Disease brochure. You can also order materials by phone. And I would like to bring to your attention our webpage on clinical trials and market research opportunities, which highlights some current clinical trials where you can click on the link to learn more about them. We also have a brochure that you can download, which provides information about what a clinical trial is and questions you should ask as you are deciding whether or not to participate in the trial. You can access this page from the link on your screen or by visiting our Center for Patient Research and Education and clicking on that first link, Clinical Trials and Research. And as Christine mentioned, if you are interested in being notified about clinical trials and other research opportunities, please email AAKP at research@aakp.org. We also have a great session titled How to Be an Effective Participant in Clinical Trials and Research Efforts from a previous national patient meeting available to view on demand at the link on your screen. We are excited to announce the dates of our 2023 events. The 5th Annual Global Summit on Kidney Disease Innovations in partnership with George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences will take place in May, the specific date to be determined. AAKP's 6th Annual Policy Summit will be a virtual event held on June 28th. The 48th Annual National Patient Meeting will take place virtually September 20th to the 22nd. And the 5th Annual AAKP Fun Walk will take place virtually December 4th through 8th, with an in-person walk in Tampa, Florida on December 9th. We invite you to let us know which events you are interested in participating this year, and we'll be sure to notify you when registration is open. You can also visit our YouTube channel to watch presentations on demand from our 2022 events and programs. I'd again like to thank Dr. Susanne Nicholas for her time today, as well as Christine Hernandez for sharing the patient perspective when it comes to clinical trial involvement. And a special thank you again to Bayer Pharmaceuticals for sponsoring this AAKP HealthLine webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. Be informed and stay safe. Thank you.